Record. All right, perfect.
Okay, and I'm recording too.
Okay, so what I always do, I'm not going to post this one on iTunes, but I always like to post the behind the scenes.
Oh, do you? Why? Why is that?
It's one of the promises I gave to my mini audience when I
Right.
started this journey to become a broadcaster. I told them that I would post all the behind the scenes, including how I'm learning to build a studio, how I test audio. So all the stuff that I post to London Reel about my ritual and preparation and how I set up my cameras. I mean, it's constantly evolving. So I show my mini audience that, yeah.
You're sharing your journey. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's, some of the people who signed up for my mini audience, they signed up through social links, meaning I didn't even know them before. And they just wanted to join me on this journey, kind of a microcosm of what Brian's doing with the Iron Mind. Obviously he has many more followers. I only have like 10 to 15 people who are following me as far as my mini audience.
But it's the experience, isn't it? You're part of a microcosm, as you said, and it's that experience of sharing your life and your journey with people that has a certain effect on you. And that's what you're getting to experience.
Absolutely. It's a mindset. So when I started this journey to become a broadcaster, I had to adjust my mindset that number one, I just needed to put myself out there. Number two, I had to be authentic in all my flaws and just let the audience know me for who I am. So, I stutter when I'm doing my vlogs and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter.
Well, you're being human, so that's what people are gonna like, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So,
Okay. Well,
yeah,
that's good.
so I don't know. Do you have any kind of normal pre-interview ritual that you go through with your guests or anything like that?
Well, I kind of have a general chat first, where I
Okay.
kind of get to know and strike a little rapport with my guests, just about random stuff, about how crazy the course is, if there's someone who's on the course, or two of my guests have been people I met traveling in Sydney. So
Mm-hmm.
just talking to them about Sydney and Australia, because it was my first time there, and just learning from them what life's like for them. All of my guests have been people I just don't know from anywhere.
Right.
So the introductory chat really helped us break the ice, even though we'd kind of spoken before on email, but
Yeah.
we hadn't ever done the face-to-face. And I guess I've seen you, you're the one with the fancy cabin, right? The glass cabin and everything.
I don't know about cabin. I do my live interviews kind of in an enclosed conference room that has
Yeah, you
glass.
do. And it's got glass. Yeah. No, I did. I was very impressed with that. You kind of had the same setup as Brian does. And I was like, wow, people on this course are like super high class at this moment with, how they're preparing. And I was busy traveling the world and I was just like, oh my goodness. But it takes many to make the world what it is. So.
Yeah, that's one of the great things I like about this course because twice already I had last minute scheduling changes
Mhm.
and so I don't actually have my own studio. So what I have to do is I have to go down to the business center in our apartment complex and I have to set everything up. I mean, I have like 3-point lighting and I have to connect everything and I have to make sure a conference room is available because you're not allowed to reserve them. And
Right.
twice I had a Zoom call, which I do in my home, and a live interview, which I have to go downstairs and do in the conference room, all kind of scheduled on the same day. So it was a lot of moving everything back and forth and setting everything up. So it's been actually a really fun experience just working through all of these different chaotic situations.
Yeah. Well, being a high flyer is no easy job. Celebrities make it look easy, but it isn't.
Well, celebrities have assistants, so I'm kind of doing everything solo.
Yeah, I know. We're all doing that. We all need assistance, really. We do.
Yeah, so I use a couple interns occasionally, but I haven't got my interns involved with my broadcasting business yet,
Right.
or my
Okay.
broadcasting initiative. So I quickly looked on your LinkedIn. You're also writing a book about the things that you're passionate about.
Well, it's actually connected to the title of my podcast and the book. I've already submitted a book proposal to Hay House in the UK, and I'm presently looking at other publishers to send the same book proposal to. But it's essentially a spiritual memoir of a lady banker, and it combines philosophies that I've studied as a child and Eastern philosophies that I've got into as an adult to material life. So in a way, like everything I learned in philosophy was confirmed on the trading floor. That
Okay.
was my experience. So that's what the book is about.
Okay. So the book is already written. You just don't have a publisher.
Yes, I'm wondering if I should do it on my own or if I should go with a publisher, because obviously it's a new direction if you go with someone like Hay House, because you sort of go off into the spiritual personal development space. They sort of make a whole workshop around it. They make you do seminars. So it's a more sort of holistic way of getting your message across to people.
Yeah, I'm also writing a book.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of, not a lot, but a little bit of, I've actually decided to go the self-publishing route.
Okay.
The reason is I've heard from a lot of people that publishers actually don't promote your book. You ultimately have to do that anyway. And just like we publish to iTunes, it's fairly simple to publish to iBooks or publish to Amazon just to self-publish. The key to selling books is the promotion. And unless you're a famous author already, from what I've learned, publishers aren't going to help you promote. Even if they accept to publish for you, you still have to promote your own book, which is another reason why I'm doing this podcast, with having a podcast that my podcast title is the same title as my book. It's called
Right.
the China Leadership Dilemma podcast. So the title of my book is the China Leadership Dilemma. And then I also have a CLD Facebook group. And a CLD YouTube channel. So all of that is just culminating in how I'm going to promote the book. I'm just trying to develop a kind of I guess what Brian would call 1,000 true fans before my book is even ready. So I'm still writing it. I won't be done until the end of the year.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a good plan, but it also feels like we're at a point where we can jump in. So do you mind if we begin?
No, we actually should begin because this is a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, well, I always do my intros and conclusions later, and my editor puts them in, so we don't need to worry about that.
Okay.
But I will start by saying, welcome, Jean Sue. We're so delighted to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to talking to you today.
Me too. Tell me, what did you have for breakfast?
I have the same breakfast every morning.
You do?
Yes, I've been having the same breakfast every morning for, I think, almost 6 months. And basically, I mix myself a very healthy protein smoothie.
And that's it?
That's all I eat for breakfast.
Wow.
And it's part of this. It's part of my desire to get more, to get healthier. I'm in my mid 40s, so long-term health is now suddenly become a priority. And last year, I also had kind of a sciatic nerve injury. I had degenerative arthritis in my lower vertebrae.
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so I had sciatic nerve pain all down one of my legs. And so I did a lot of research on how to reduce inflammation, how to improve health. So I basically changed my diet completely, and drinking a blended protein smoothie with a lot of cruciferous vegetables and healthy stuff is what I do every morning.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm still trying to quit my habit of caffeine. I know it doesn't really help me, but I just get some comfort out of it. And you've sort of inspired me to take the next step and just do a healthy smoothie, because I do a smoothie too. I'm a firm believer in them.
Well, caffeine is not as bad as a lot of other things that we put in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this whole holistic approach to your lifestyle, it's not just what you eat for breakfast. That's only one really small component. I've also learned that sleep is really important.
Uh-huh.
Not consuming alcohol is important.
Yes.
And for me, a male in my mid 40s, I have to cut certain foods that produce estrogen. And I have to eat more foods that boost naturally producing testosterone. Because as males age, they generate less natural testosterone, which is the male hormone. So I've cut certain things out of my diet. For example, I don't eat pork anymore, but I can eat steak and I can eat chicken. I don't drink milk anymore. So I substitute that with soy milk. So these are just examples of adjustments that I've made in my diet and lifestyle to live longer and healthier.
Yeah, and why not? We need people like you around for longer. So for our listeners, do give us a quick background about who you are and what you do on this beautiful planet of ours.
Well, my journey is really kind of, I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. So for people in Europe who may not be familiar, Georgia is kind of it's in the South. Of the original 13 colonies, Georgia is in the South. So the South also fought a war with the North in the American Civil War. So I grew up in the South at a time where there were very few people with an Asian face. Okay, so one of the things I can remember when I was growing up is every kid who met me, the first thing they assumed is I knew karate. Because
no way! Oh my goodness.
Because back in that time period, the only Chinese person or only Asian person that they knew of was Bruce Lee. That was when basically America was really quite ignorant of what's happening on the other side of the globe. There was a lot of, I can even remember there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment back then. Everything was buy American because there was an influx and import of a lot of Japanese cars and stuff like that. So that's the environment in which I grew up. I grew up in the South. And then my journey has taken me all over the world, but from a business standpoint, it's mainly focused on doing business in China. So I had my first assignment as a country manager in Taiwan in 1996. And I basically, to make a long story short, I've been doing business in Asia and China as a bilingual business person for the last 20 years. And what I've done today is having the language skills to communicate with local Chinese people, being married actually to somebody from China. What does that enable me to do is understand at a deeper level, what are the nuances of the cultural differences between an American and Western culture and a very different Chinese culture. And that is now part of my business. So my business called EME China Consultants is all focused around one thing. And that one thing is what I call a China leadership dilemma. For those who are in the technology field, Clayton Christensen in the late 90s wrote a book called The Innovators Dilemma. And that explains why large successful technology companies always fail to respond to smaller, more nimble, disruptive technologies. And the thesis is what has made companies successful ultimately lead them to failure because They are unable to change. They want to keep milking their cash cow. And then some disruptive technology comes on board, and the incumbents are disrupted. The China leadership dilemma is the same thing. So when foreign executives or American expats are sent to China on foreign assignments, they're typically selected because they've done well within the company, and they're also well known within the industry. And so what has made them successful, for example, in my case here in America with an American company, when these executives, including myself, when we go to China, because we don't fully understand Chinese culture, we're not able to be empathetic to the Chinese values and the Chinese mindset. We experience a lot of what we call unexpected disappointments. And unexpected disappointments due to myopia, a lack of awareness, and a phrase that Donald Rumsfeld coined, unknown unknowns, things you don't know you don't know. These are the things that cause you to have a negative perception in the eyes of the people that you're communicating or working with or leading, in this case, China. And because you're unaware, you lack self-awareness. So you don't know how they perceive you. You don't know what they're really thinking and how they're talking to you behind your back. And you're not empathetic to what they value and what they care about. In my mind, that's a recipe for a lot of the negative situations that foreign executives face in China. But we hear about it in terms of a complaint, right? A lot of foreigners will complain about Chinese people don't understand this, Chinese people can't do this. They'll complain about government intervention, government policies, Chinese government bureaucracies. It's always a complaint and an excuse to justify why they aren't able to succeed. And what they don't do is they don't control the only levers that they can control. And I call these AMA values. This is your attitude, your mindset, and your approach. And what I've discovered is if you just adjust your attitude, mindset, and approach, you can change how other people perceive you. And if you can start the conversation off on a more positive trajectory, you have a much higher likelihood of achieving a more favorable outcome in the long term.
Absolutely. And what I love about your story is that, you know, you actually grew up with the effects of prejudice, because you were saying you grew up in the South. And
Yes.
as an adult, you've actually taken on a path where you're actually trying to bridge the gap between understanding of two cultures. So it's almost as if your experience created a little, or planted a little seed that has now grown into this glorious plant that is now providing shade to so many people with all these miscommunications and misunderstandings about Chinese culture. And what I also loved about what you said is you're quite focused on integration and adapting and creating self-awareness. And these are sort of qualities that you need to embrace if you want to really thrive in the world on a multi-level as a human being. So not just economically, but mentally and emotionally, and even spiritually. If you want to actually connect with another culture or with a set of people, you have to have a holistic approach to that culture and business. You know, I've had, and that's what I love about your story, that you've come this full circle. You know, what I found, well, when I worked in banking with Chinese traders, is there was a big difference between Chinese traders in New York and a big difference with Chinese traders in Hong Kong. And as the local markets started to open up, you found the differences increasing a little more. And what was interesting to me with that is that, and I talk about this in my book, is that everybody builds little cages around them based on what they've been exposed to, based on their culture, based on their upbringing. And everyone likes to stay in those cages. No one's really connecting, you know? And that's why we have an increasingly polarized society And that's what I love about what you're doing. And that brings me to my next question. I really want to know, what is the essence of being Chinese, and what is the essence of being an expat Chinese?
Yeah. So, well, you actually just made some very, very profound observations. I want to comment on those a little bit.
Sure.
Um, so you noticed that I was shaped by the environment in which I was raised. So um, when being the only, not just Chinese person, but being the only Asian looking person from first grade all the way through, I don't remember seeing another Asian kid in my school until maybe I got to 11th grade. Okay. So what that made me was very, very, at that point, I was very self-conscious because I knew
Mhm.
I looked different than everybody else. But what that translated into further on in my life is it translated into a higher level of awareness. Okay. Because I was so self-conscious that I looked different as a younger person, that I think constantly thinking about how I'm perceived by other people, even though at that point I even had a negative stereotype of Chinese people because I grew up in this very white Christian Southern. All my neighbors went to church on Sunday, they did Bible study. So I grew up in this environment. And while nobody, while I didn't face, really strong kind of racist discrimination, I could always sense that I was different. And one of the things that I really help so I mentor a lot of students, and then I coach a lot of executives as my clients. And one of the things, I think there's a very fine line. Everybody has a cultural bias because everybody has their own perceptions and their misperceptions. It's based on the environment in which we grew up. I think it's a very fine line between cultural bias and prejudice. It's
Mhm.
actually a very fine line. And so what happens is, especially in China, you're going to find, even between Chinese people, because China is actually not homogeneous. China is a mix of 57 different ethnicities within China. They all have their different food. They even have a different language. They share different values. So for foreigners, they think China is just one big market, but it's not. It's a lot of different cultures. And what happens is whenever there are either cultural biases or prejudices, we as individuals naturally react in a very angry, frustrated, or negative manner. Because especially if we feel we are being discriminated against, and with the whole Me Too movement and all that stuff, that's very natural. But from a business standpoint, whether I'm coaching or advising my clients who are Americans or Europeans, or if I'm advising the other side, which is Chinese executives, I always tell them that cultural biases and even prejudices are natural. And the key is actually not to react to it at all. And the key
Mm.
is actually not only to not react to it, but actually, and this is part of emotional intelligence, is actually to not even let it bother you, which means that we come from different cultural backgrounds. I'm just going to assume that you have some natural cultural biases against me because either I'm an American or I'm a Chinese American or I'm a male. And the key to success is not judging people or criticizing people for their cultural biases. The key to success is being aware of what those cultural biases may be. And then what you can
Mhm.
do is you can adjust how you communicate with this person who has these cultural biases to flip the script, to
Yeah.
turn the situation into your advantage. So if you know somebody is biased against you, or because in your case, assume that you are a minority woman, and you may experience that somebody will just naturally assume that you're not as capable as of leading as a 6 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyed male. Okay. Instead of being angry about that, just surprise the people who have those biases, right? Because it's almost like salesmanship. The key to successful sales is always to exceed the customer's expectations. And if you're aware of what people's negative or cultural biases or even prejudices are against you, it becomes much easier if you can adjust your attitude, mindset, and approach to pleasantly surprise people and exceed their expectations. And that's an advantage that most people fail to create because their immediate reaction to any cultural bias is a negative reflection.
I think, yes. And I think there are lots of parallels with what you've just said, especially when it comes to the AMAs and wanting to even cultivate them and our theme. So, Date Your Ego, Marry Your Soul is an effort to sort of explain why there is so much violence in the world, or why there is prejudice and why people suffer as a result of their attitudes towards each other. I think when you're very recognized with your ego, you tend to also believe in or assume a negative intention from the opposite side. Like you said, if someone has a cultural bias, the best thing and the most emotionally intelligent thing is not to react at all. But if you're very invested with your ego, it's very hard not to get emotional about such stuff. And when you're invested with your ego will make you react in a defensive way because its job is to promote you in this world. And that's where the element of your soul comes in, because your soul is ageless, sexless, professionless. It's here to love you. It's been your companion for lifetimes, and it's here to make you learn certain lessons and then leave. You know, the only two certainties in a lifetime for a human being is birth and death. So in that time, you got to do something. And I'm not sure we were just born to get an education, pay bills, and die. I know there's more to this lifetime. And what I like about what the AMAs are asking our audience members to do is to put aside those surface feelings of defensiveness, of negativity, of bias, and try a new, more fresher approach of looking at the situation, or if someone treats you badly, looking at it as though how you could possibly turn it around, how it actually doesn't affect you, and how it actually is an opportunity rather than, you know, a fight.
Yeah, well, between the certainties in life, which is birth and death, in between those two certainties, there's another thing. It's called life.
Yes.
Right? Between birth and death, there's life. And so regarding this whole ego thing, so I don't talk about ego. There's an equivalent to ego in Chinese culture. It's called face. Okay, so face is actually more extreme in governing emotions than actually ego. Okay, it's even more extreme. If you learn anything about Chinese culture, the entire way that Chinese culture works is based on a system of guanxi relationships, reciprocity, and the giving and receiving of face. So by definition, Chinese people have a lot more ego invested in all of their relationships. And that's what, so you talk about ego from a more Western point of view, and yes, so ego, so the way that I work with clients and the way we work with students is you have to understand your ego or your need for face. If I'm talking to a Chinese person, you have to understand it in the context of the purpose of your life. Okay.
Right.
So the purpose of your life in the way that I approach it, the purpose of your life also, I mean, obviously includes your family, but it also includes, in this society, it includes your career. And if you're able to develop a more prosperous career where you're able to generate a good financial income and you're also able to make a difference and help people, then of course that's the best of both worlds. And what people fail to understand is they don't understand their ego in the context of what they want to achieve in their life and in their careers. And it's a fact that most people, especially when you ask them, because I mean, especially younger people, but I find this in older people too. So I do a lot of workshops for students for their career development and stuff like that. And most people don't focus on understanding who they are and where they're going. And if you don't understand who you are and where you're going, you can't put the context of having an ego in the it's more holistic. You look at your life not static in the moment. You look at your life through the continuum of where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. And when people start to analyze that, they start to realize, at least the people that I work with, they start to realize that ego doesn't serve any positive benefit in any aspect of your life. And my wife is Chinese. So she'll say that I'm very thick-skinned because I don't seem to care what other people think of me at all. But she understands that in the wrong context. She thinks that sometimes I'm not saving my face, or I'm not, I don't care about my face. I'm doing something that might be actually embarrassing. But if I'm looking at this thing holistically, I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what my values are. I know my motivation is not selfish. I know my motivation is actually to help, inspire, and empower as many people as I can to succeed in these cross-cultural interactions. And when I am critical of people, or I give them constructive criticism, or I just say, that just wouldn't work in Chinese culture, or vice versa. When I tell Chinese people that just doesn't work here in American culture, a lot of people, their first reaction is to be defensive. And I've had Chinese people tell me, said, when you tell me what I'm saying is irrelevant, you're being disrespectful. I said, no. If my goal was to just be respectful and give you face, you would extract zero value from our conversation. I'm actually trying to help you achieve the goals that you already articulated to me at the beginning of our conversation. And since you are Chinese and you don't understand American culture, these are the things that you need to be aware of, because you don't understand that the negative perceptions or the negative biases or stereotypes that Americans have of Chinese people, if you're just behaving like the stereotypes, you won't be able to overcome them. Don't judge the stereotypes. Just understand that they exist, free from emotion, and then adjust your attitude, mindset, and approach to change people's perceptions. And then you will form even stronger, more lasting, trusting relationships than if you just try to argue with people and try to change their perceptions with, a very argumentative fashion.
Yeah, no, I think you made some really good points there. Can you tell me what the Chinese name for ego is? What is face in Chinese?
It's 面子.
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 Yeah,
so
面子.
And I can very much grasp that the cultural implication of the word ego can have a far-reaching effect on some cultures, whereas in other more sort of younger cultures, they're not even aware of its existence.
Absolutely.
I think traditional cultures are more aware of its existence, and yet they live with it. But more younger cultures aren't even aware that they're acting out of their ego.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the Western world, and especially the United States, there's another area, in my opinion, where America leads the world. And that is in the understanding of human psychology, and even the academic term that we all now refer to as EQ, or emotional intelligence. So by definition, emotional intelligence is being aware of your emotions and then being able to manage them. Actually, in a culture like China, and I assume a lot of Asian cultures are similar, emotional intelligence by definition is not only not necessary, people are just not even aware of it. Okay, there is no need in a Guanxi-based hierarchical society such as China, where your level of promotion is basically based on the reciprocity of giving and receiving. You never, when I say never, I'm just saying in the context of the general culture, there isn't a need to make people like you. There isn't a need to make people believe that you are trustworthy, because how people respond to you is basically your level of authority. This is the hierarchical system that's been, I mean, this is since Confucius. Confucius talks about social harmony and understanding the hierarchy between heaven, earth, emperor, father, son, daughter, and then the whole network of what we call weak links is basically your level of Guanxi. Are you a family member, which is the closest level of Guanxi? Or are you a close friend? Are you just an associate? Or do you have no Guanxi? You're just a stranger. And depending on the level of Guanxi, there will be a different behavioral response or reaction. In Western culture, especially in the United States, we talk about fairness. Everybody talks about fairness. And one of the things that I've observed is that fairness is a matter of context. Everybody believes they are treated unfairly because nobody is looking at things in the context of how people and different things work together. And when people start to talk about fairness, whether it's Chinese people talking to their American expat managers who have come over, or it's Americans talking about things that the government has mandated or restricted when they go to China, I always tell my clients and my students that fairness, or what you believe is fair, is irrelevant. Okay, whatever the macro environment is, whatever people's biases are, it is what it is. In order for you to be successful, you just need to be aware of it. If you're self-aware and you're empathetic, if you have these, what I call essential soft skills that matter, then basically you have within your control the ability to, I use this word with caution, you have the ability to manipulate any situation to be more favorable to you. And
no, I do understand that you're coming from, a very much China leadership dilemma point of view. But I do believe that this idea of judgment and fairness can only occur when people get a little too carried away with their pride, knowing and thinking that they know best.
Yeah,
they don't
ego,
know. Yeah. It's a very ego-driven process. Judgment is a very ego-driven process. And, I don't remember the word you said about the Guanzu. Is it what is it? Guanxi and the hierarchical society. In order to actually not get caught up in those definitions that have just existed forever, a human being has to first recognize they are a human being, and there is a special quality about them that goes beyond their identity and economic status. And I think it might be more difficult for people that have to, fight for their next meal to think about these concepts. But really, unless people are very connected to their essence of being a human being, the essence of them being their soul, they will get thrown all over the world, all over the place. Their emotions will be manipulated. They will be judged against yardsticks they did not create. And if they take all of that too seriously, they can seriously have their own heart broken and find that they become very angry people, and the world doesn't need angry people. So I think from everything you've said, what I'd like to really learn from you, because you're so knowledgeable about such an ancient culture on two sides of the world, really. I'd really like to go back to my question about what is the essence of being Chinese and what is the essence of being an international Chinese person?
Well, you have to qualify what you mean by Chinese. So I'm what's considered overseas Chinese.
Yes. So what would be the difference between you and say, and I guess an educated professional man or woman in China? Like, is there who hasn't left China? What I'm trying to understand is how much living abroad, because you've obviously bridged the gap. You know, you
Yeah.
bridge the gap and you can connect with both cultures. So if I'm sure you know people who haven't really left China, who work in China and whose life is in China. What is the difference in attitudes between an international Chinese like you or an American Chinese like you and a Chinese that has stayed back or not left China?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. The diff Your most formidable years, the environment in which you grew up. So, uh, Chinese people from mainland China, they become international business travelers. They become global citizens. There are so many Chinese who now invest abroad, buy property abroad and move their kids and their families abroad. I mean, some of the main destinations is Southern California, Australia, New Zealand, even the UK. I mean, so it's really hard to just quantify the difference between me being a global Chinese citizen or
Mm,
global American citizen and a Chinese person who has a lot of global ties and global experiences. It all comes down, in my opinion, fundamentally to cultural differences. Cultural differences lead to value differences, and
mhm,
value differences lead to a different set of priorities. And the biggest difference is Chinese people from mainland China who grew up in that environment, even if they've spent 20 years living abroad, they can't get rid of what you call ego, which means they care more about their face than the results or the outcome. Now, of course, that's a general statement. There's also, because they grew up in mainland China, which is completely different than the United States. So if anybody actually studies cultural differences, Gert Hofstede has measured every country on all of these different cultural dimensions: uncertainty, avoidance, power distance, and all of this stuff. And if you look at these charts, China and America are always at opposite ends of the spectrum along almost every cultural dimension that this person, Hofstede, has tried to measure.
mhm.
That's all fine and great from an academic point of view, but from a practical point of view, you just have to understand that I would almost argue that across cultural differences like those between America and China, there are almost no such thing as universal values. So most people who are spiritual, who are religious, always believe that certain values are universal. But if you take the human element out of it, if you just look at it in a business context, uh, from a business point of view, you just have to assume that no values are universal, because otherwise you would think everybody in China is unethical, which is just not true. It's just a different cultural context. I'll give you an example. Deeply embedded in Chinese culture is the giving and receiving of face. That means if I give you face, I want to make you feel good. I praise you. I tell you nice things about you. I commend you, even if I don't believe it in my heart. So if you look at that in a different way, giving somebody face, which is deeply embedded in Chinese culture, by Western definitions, is to be disingenuous. Okay. Not only does it mean to be disingenuous, certain people actually think giving and receiving a face because they're absolutists. They actually believe that Chinese people just are flat out liars. I've been in the company of a lot of foreigners in China, and when the Chinese people are giving them face, they just call them liars. And it's unbelievable.
Mm.
I'll give you a really funny example. So I know this guy. he was kind of a friend of mine. He's from Britain, and he was living in China for the like 4 or 5 years as a language teacher. So he was teaching English, and he was teaching at these international schools. And he was dating a lot of people. As a foreigner in China, you get a lot of people that you can date. So he always has bad experiences dating Chinese people, Chinese girls or Chinese women. And he would always complain to me. He goes, "Oh, Gene, Chinese women are crazy. I'm no longer going to date Chinese women." He would always say that. And he says, "I'm only going to date foreigners now. No more Chinese women." And then through happenstance, but he always reverts back. And my wife and I introduced him to this Chinese girl. And he really, really liked this girl a lot, because it wasn't somebody he met at a bar. It wasn't somebody that he met on an app. It was somebody who we introduced him to. And after a few weeks, he said, "I think this girl is the one. I really want to just be exclusive with her." And he invited her to go on a vacation with him. Okay, so you have to imagine, so when school is out, he just travels all over. And so he wanted to invite this girl to go on vacation with him. I think it was to like Singapore or something like that. And she just said, "Oh," and this is very typical. She says, "I have to go back and see my parents. My mother is sick." Okay. So you'll be amazed that mothers in China are often sick, because
Are often sick? Sorry.
are often sick.
Oh my God, why?
Because telling you that I have to go see my sick mother is a face-saving way of declining your invitation.
Right, I get it.
So what happened is, this friend of mine discovered that this girl didn't go back to her hometown to visit her mother, and her mother wasn't sick. And he was basically irate. He was just saying, if she didn't want to go with me, or she felt we were moving too fast, she just should have told me. She shouldn't have lied. He's been living in China for 4 years, and he doesn't understand that this is just a face-saving way, a nice way of turning you down. No matter how much I explained it to him, he just would continue to say, "But she lied. She didn't have to lie. It's a lie because she lied to me." And he was just fixated on the fact that her mom actually wasn't sick. But in China, that's how people talk. Anytime somebody doesn't want to do something, they just come up with a reason that saves face for the person that's being turned down. And so many Westerners don't understand that. They interpret it literally as a lie.
Mm-hmm.
But in China, which is another difference between Westerners and Chinese people, is Chinese people think in a circular manner. That's a very generic way of understanding that Chinese don't think in a linear manner. There's not a cause and effect. They think in a circular manner. So when I advise people, and I've actually even written articles about it, if you want to communicate effectively with Chinese people, you have to be empathetic to what's in people's hearts and not engage with them at the surface. Because at the surface, they may be venting or frustrated about something that they care about, but because there's no example and there's language barriers, they may just react to some situation on the surface, but that actually doesn't reflect their point of view. It doesn't reflect what their position is. The only way to really understand what their position is to be empathetic to what's at the center of the circle. And that's the mistake that most foreigners make. They react to confrontation or things that are potentially confrontational, as opposed to being empathetic to what actually people think and feel. And if you can do that, you can actually avoid an escalation of disagreements into an argument or a fight.
No, I mean, yes, I agree. Being empathetic is also the way to integration ultimately. But I think your patience levels, and if you've entered a completely different world of understanding, your patient levels can be really tested if the people you're interacting with don't think in a similar manner to you. But then, like you said, knowledge is key, and knowledge is the most important tool here. Because if you understand that Chinese people think in a circular way, you won't expect them to react in a certain way. So you'll be fine with it.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say awareness is key, not
awareness,
knowledge. Awareness is
awareness.
key. Yeah,
And
I was once sitting with a client and we were talking about this exact thing. And since I've been doing business in China for 20 years, they say, how do you manage the frustration when Chinese people, uh, or they say, do you get frustrated when the employees that you lead in China, et cetera, are behaving this way? And I said, no. And I remember she says, how do you do that? I said, well, I never get frustrated because I already expect people to behave that way. I
yes, but
expect,
I do believe that ultimately, whether you're Chinese or American Chinese or Italian or American or English, beyond your cultural differences, there is still a language of the heart. And I believe this with life experience, and I believe this with my whole life, really. I think there's a certain percentage of the world that operates on a surface level, and that is to be expected given the economic growth we're seeing around the globe, given the economic focus we're seeing around the globe. That is to be expected. But I do believe there's a large percentage that still operates on the quality of just being human and can communicate on that level. And I think that's what this show is most about, how we can transcend our differences through identifying with our soul qualities, so we find more commonality. Because ultimately everyone's on a journey, whether you're doing business, whether you're a doctor, whether you're just a wife, whichever country you're living in, you're on this journey, and
yeah,
everybody's trying to get somewhere. Like you said, between life and death there is life. Right? Between birth and death there is life, and it's the quality of that life, and it's what you do with that time and how you feel in that time.
yeah.
That
Actually, I think we're saying almost the exact same thing. If people from whatever cultural differences, whatever value differences, whatever country, if they want to communicate more effectively with each other, they want to build stronger relationships, the key is connecting in the heart.
yes.
Right. So what happens is, if you use Americans in China as an example, most Americans aren't connecting with the heart. They're connecting with what surrounds the heart, which is just a reaction. So what I'm actually advising my clients, in this case, my American clients doing business in China, yes, I use the word empathy, but I'm actually advising them exactly what you're saying. They have to connect with Chinese people at a deeper spiritual, soulful level. And you can't do that if, number one, you don't care what they care about. And number two, if you don't understand what they care about. I mean, we just use empathy as a broad term that encapsulates all of that, but it's basically saying the same thing in a different way. It's just you have to connect with people at the heart and soul of who they are. And you can't do that if you're unwilling to listen, if you don't, like we said, put your ego to one side, and 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 if you're unable to be non-judgmental, it makes it almost impossible. Ego, judgment, all of these things erect barriers between you and somebody else's heart. And that's the
Hmm.
way that I look at it.
I love that you're incorporating that into the business world and giving them actual tools that they can use to make that relationship more holistic. But I want to ask you a few questions about your own self and what this person that has these wonderful ideals can does for himself. And I want to know, what is the one thing that you do to love and appreciate yourself?
Well, to love and appreciate myself. So I think what I one of the things that I've developed over time, because I really focus on self-awareness, understanding myself, understanding who I am and where I want to go, and empathy, which is understanding other people. What that has done is that has given me a level of optimism and positivity about where I'm currently am in my life and where I'm in the journey that I'm on and where I'm going. So having that framework where I don't, relative to a lot of people that I coach, I don't have that ego. I don't have that need for face because I've eliminated the triggers of negative emotions almost completely out of my life. This enables me to feel really positive and optimistic about where I am and who I am and where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our first time kind of communicating, but if we, work with each other or we're around each other on a regular basis, you would experience that I'm always, relatively speaking, I'm always more positive and more optimistic. There's always two sides to every story. And it's not that I don't look at things that potentially could cause negative outcomes. Of course I do. But I always put it in the context of what can I do to affect change in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like there's a Chinese saying where every crisis is an opportunity. Okay,
Yes.
that's just a very cliche phrase to not be so overly absorbed in a crisis where you can't function. That phrase is trying to give people a different way of looking at things that are happening that may put your life into crisis mode or put your career into crisis mode or whatever like that. But people always look in hindsight, and when they see disruptions in their life, I had a lot of disruptions in my life, really negative, bad things that have happened. I've lost a child in childbirth. I've had a DUI where I had a mild concussion and lost memory and had to withdraw from school that I was going to. I've been laid off. I've been divorced. A lot of negative things have happened in my life, but in hindsight, the way that I reacted, adjusted, and overcome those negative things have put me on the path to where I am today. And one of the things that it's almost a strange kind of spiritual thing. Once you've reached what I call a mastery of what I call cross-cultural performance, or becoming a master of cross-cultural performance, the things that you can see in hindsight, how they benefited you today, for me, I see those in foresight.
Right.
The things that are not creating a financial advantage for me, the things that are actually can be perceived as a short-term setback, I see these forward looking. In foresight, I can see how these connections and these situations are still building the character that I'm trying to develop, shape me into the person that I want to become, and help me be more proficient in my craft of helping other people develop these essential soft skills that matter. So when I look at things in foresight, because I am aware of how things manifested in hindsight, this continuity of my journey from where I came from to where I am today to where I'm going, this continuity gives me peace and balance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best way that I can describe it. And
Right.
I can't say I've helped a lot of people, but I've helped several people look at their life in a different context, look at their careers, look at their behaviors, and especially look at their attitude, mindset, and approach in a different context. And when they start to make those adjustments, if they don't see it in foresight, they at least can start to feel the differences in how people around them respond to them.
And I think from that very insightful answer, what I'm getting for my audience is that you can be in a very focused job, career, trajectory, and still figure out a more holistic way to manage your interactions in the world. And a cross-cultural opportunity is a gateway to deepen that holistic connection with humanity. It's nothing else. Every challenge that you come across, not just in a cross-cultural context, but also in life, in work, is an opportunity to actually make a more holistic connection. You don't have to give up on your holistic side for a career. You just don't. That doesn't have to be the case. And in fact, from your life, we can see that it's benefited you, because you're making choices that are allowing you to not only earn money, but also help people while you're doing that.
Yeah, I think we're saying the exact same thing. You use the word holistic. I use the word balance. So I talk a lot about, I have these tools that I give my students and my clients. It's called the Balance of Extremes Cross-Cultural Performance Analysis, or BOE for short.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, you have to, holistic is actually a better word. Actually, I just recently wrote an article, and you just reminded me of this. So a lot of people talk about ways to improve their life and their business, their leadership qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, especially in a cross-cultural situation, they talk about things like emotional intelligence, and they talk about things like cultural intelligence. And everything can have an intelligence at the end of it, and it describes some aspect of who you are. I just sent you a LinkedIn request. The last article that I wrote happened to be an article called Holistic Intelligence. And I think that might actually be very interesting to your readers or your audience, because I talk about exactly what you're talking about. If you look at every discipline by itself, whether it's emotional intelligence or cultural intelligence, it actually it's very difficult for that to lead to any change or make any difference. Just consuming content and then saying, oh yeah, that makes sense. But how does that affect your life? How does that change behavior? In my experience, only for very few people does it actually make a difference. So in my cross-cultural performance training, I've tried to take what you would call a more holistic approach, because we need to just focus on what we understand in the context of people we interact with and the larger environment. And we have to understand that in context, and then we have to figure out what adjustments that we can make that are easily controllable. If you have too many things that are too theoretical, you can't find the balance of how to incorporate that into who you are. I've simplified it. I basically say there are 3 things that you can adjust: your attitude, your mindset, and approach. And in the continuity of your life, your family goals, your professional goals, your personal goals, your attitude, mindset, and approach will ultimately influence everybody that you interact with. I mean, including, one of the funny things is I'm not a relationship coach or a marriage counselor, but I get a lot of people asking me advice about relationships, especially about intercultural relationships, because I help everybody. I'm able to help people see things from a different perspective or a different context, or in your words, to take a more holistic approach of people's behaviors and why people are actually fighting or disagreeing or whatever. And then once you understand it in context, then you're not as angry, you're not as emotional, and you're able to just communicate more effectively with somebody that you're in a conflict with or in an argument with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think when you choose the relationship over yourself, you're always choosing better.
Yes.
I do believe that. And I do believe where there's love, that is always the right choice. That's all we have time for today, but I'd really like our listeners to know how they can reach you. What is the best place to get in touch with some of your work and articles? Could you please tell us?
Well, the name of my company is called EME China Consultants. So the web address is just emechina.us. If you go on iTunes, the podcast that I've launched is called the China Leadership Dilemma Podcast. So if you just go to my website or go to my podcast, you'll see ways to connect with me. There's also a Facebook group called CLD Nation. There's also a YouTube channel where you can see all of my vlogs and behind the scenes of all the videos and lessons that I do.
That's wonderful. Thank you so very much. I feel like in the world that's about to come, you're going to make ripples of good effect, you know, like peaceful effect. And you're going to really balance out this whole craziness called globalization that we haven't yet got to grips with as a world. But I think we're getting there, and you're going to be instrumental in that.
Well, thank you. I hope the message gets out. You know, my company is called EME. ME stands for multicultural environments, but it also stands for me. So my focus is really just on helping individuals to make a difference in their professional and personal lives.
Well, I'm certainly feeling the positive ripples, and I'm sure the world is too. So thank you so very much. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Thank you, Serafina. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. So, so you're going to, now after the show, you can always,
post-show ritual. I'm so thirsty for some reason.
Yeah. So you say you do a separate introduction for each show.
I do. Yes, I do. So I'll go away and I will listen to the whole show, and then I'll do an introduction and a conclusion on you.
Oh, okay.
And what we discussed, and because I feel like this is a show that's meant to be for people on their commute. So I want them to know what the show is about before the show begins.
Okay.
And then they can decide if they want to tune in or not, or jump this episode and come back to another one, you know. So I think I really like the fact that we could have this conversation, because I love anything that is focused, like a China focus or Europe focus or Asia focus. I love it, or America focus, because I feel like people are scared to do that. And even though we're becoming a increasingly globalized and international society, bridges are needed, you know, bridging people are needed. And I think that's what you're doing. And so I've sort of now realized that, you know, this podcast could have an audience in China. There's one question I was embarrassed to ask you.
Yeah,
Can I ask you, will you not get offended?
No, I never get offended.
Okay, so how do people from China, I'm assuming from our chat that they're from mainland China, how do people from China have so much money that they always buy the most expensive properties all over the world? Like, how do they have all this money? I don't get it. Like, the kids are always carrying like the designer goods of the latest collections, and you know, they're buying up hotels and buildings, and Nine Elms here in Battersea is bought up by Chinese investors. I mean, where's the money coming from?
Well, I don't know why you would be embarrassed to ask me that question, but
I don't know. I was just being sensitive, because it's something I've always thought of, and I just wonder, you know, with the Russians, you think they're mafia. I know Chinese people are not mafia, so I don't.
Well, it depends what your definition of mafia is. So a lot of people, I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it. So the entire country of China and the entire Chinese single party government, it can also be described as kind of a mafia organization. And the reason is because there's no balance of power. There's no accountability. You know, here in the US, we have 3 branches of government, and they're supposed to keep each other in check. We call it checks and balances. In China, it's an absolute authoritarian government. Mm-hmm. It just happens that, you know, there's no difference between China and North Korea as far as the basic system of government.
I was gonna say, but North Korea has a proper. I watched a documentary on it recently, and the hatred for America is surprising. Like the level to which people have been brainwashed to spend their life killing Americans. I'm just like, no, your life is worth a lot more. But I was
Well,
thinking that China doesn't
that
feel that, do they?
well, well, you don't, you haven't talked to a lot of Chinese people who see. There's many tiers of Chinese people.
Yes.
So in North Korea, when you saw that documentary, it's propaganda, right?
Hmm.
So in China, the elite who have wealth and they travel the world, they buy properties and they buy luxury items, the system in China benefits them disproportionately.
How? I
So
mean, to that extent, it's like they spend millions upon millions. It's insane.
yeah, well, like I said, there's 1.3 billion people. So if even 1%, if 1% of the population has 80% of the wealth, that 1% is still a lot of people, right?
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So the majority of China wealth is coming from what would be equivalent to Russian oligarchs.
Right.
Okay. Everybody who is wealthy, 90% of the people who are wealthy coming from China, they're somehow connected in the government hierarchy.
Ah,
And
I
that's why they
see.
have so much money, because China is just so many people. So every provincial governor will be able to control his little kind of kingdom and basically accumulate a lot of wealth kind of through, it's almost like the president of China now has changed the Chinese constitution where now he is leader for life. I don't know if you read that news.
He's leader for life.
Right. So
How
uh
can that be? So,
well, it's a single party system.
my
And
God. So what happens? Only if he dies, there's a new guy allowed in? Is that how he thinks it's gonna work?
well, so what happened um after the communist revolution, uh there was this whole period of very negative history in China, and then China's leader after Mao Zedong died, Deng Xiaoping, he started China on a path to opening up. Okay, so this happened like in the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and he set up a system to kind of within China to not have absolute authority. So their transition was every 10 years there would be a new president. Every 10 years there would be a new president. So for the last 40 years, every 10 years there's been a new Chinese president. And now what Xi Jinping has done is Xi Jinping has consolidated his power, and now he's changed the constitution where there won't be another president in 5 years now. He is basically now leader for life.
Wow. Sounds like he needs to marry his soul a bit and understand that power isn't everything in life.
Yeah, and so obviously a lot of Western journalists and writers and analysts think that this is a bad thing. Um,
But is it
I
a
don't
good
think
thing? It's a
I don't
good
think
thing.
I don't think I have enough information to decide whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Uh, there's a lot of indicators that the current Chinese president is doing a lot of positive things. He has a huge anti-corruption drive. He's doing a lot of great things for China. That's why China is so powerful on the global stage. So the
Mhm.
1.3 billion people living in China, they're not going to care that they can't access Facebook and YouTube, and some of their freedom of expressions or freedom of speeches are censored. They're not going to care about that. They only care about their economic upward mobility. And the reality in China is more people are improving their living standards day after day and year after year. And this is
Yeah,
what
but the environmental damage that they're seeing is also not it's it's no it's not I don't know, they know about it.
They do know about it, but it's not a priority.
That's crazy. I find that crazy. I just
Because even though, so for example, so even though China may be the world's largest polluter today, or it could be India, I'm not sure. But the reality is all of these Western countries, Britain or United Kingdom and the United States, we started our industrial revolution much earlier. There was a period of time in Britain where the smog was so bad that people were getting sick, right?
Yes.
So did Britain sacrifice its economic engine to stop the Industrial Revolution? I think the answer is no.
They went 2 steps ahead and they took advantage of the whole world economic engine. They just
so the reality now is China is leading the world in clean tech.
Clean tech, right?
Yeah. So China is the world's largest consumer of solar panels. China has the largest number of almost free bicycles that you can just ride to reduce the need for people to commute in their cars. So it's not, yes, China's industrial revolution is causing a lot of environmental damage, but in balance, China's government is doing more about that than probably any other government in the world.
So they're very proactive, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm just saying within the context. So Western countries, because we've already passed our industrial revolution, we've moved more from a manufacturing economy to a knowledge and service economy. It's easy for us to judge China's current state of economic development and all of the negative effects of that.
Yeah.
And that's judging China at the macro level is the thing I advise against when executives judge Chinese people at the micro level. It's irrelevant. You can't change it. To complain about it, to be an activist, I don't think ultimately it serves any purpose. The people who are harmed most by China's environmental issues are Chinese.
Yeah, it's true. That's why I brought it up when you spoke about them increasing their
so China actually is doing a lot about that.
Yeah.
Probably more than the United States. I mean, just think about it this way. The US administration has just pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords.
But that's crazy. They have a crazy president there at the moment.
Yeah. So
tell me,
China,
Jane,
China could be leading this effort.
Sorry? Yeah, no, you're right. They're leading the way. Yeah. What have you thought about? I'm looking at that sign behind you, the China Leadership Dilemma.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about China Connection Dilemma?
No.
Because it feels like you're just making this whole thing happen for people. So I guess, you're teaching businesses to be leaders. I see the connection. Right.
No, it's an analogy to another book called The Innovators Dilemma.
Oh, I see the one you mentioned. I see.
Yeah. So the Innovators Dilemma is in technology and business. Everybody knows about the Innovators Dilemma. Everybody knows about disruptive technologies because somebody wrote a book called The Innovators Dilemma, and it explains why successful companies fail. My China Leadership Dilemma is a play on words of the Innovators Dilemma, and it explains why foreign leaders fail in China, because what has made them successful outside of China will cause myopia, a lack of awareness for them to succeed within China, because the cultural dichotomies, the cultural forces are just something that you cannot overcome as a foreigner. You just simply cannot overcome the cultural forces at play. It's almost like the invisible hand in economics. Foreigners thinking that who think they're righteous, and they think every Chinese aspires to be more American or more European or whatever. That's just ridiculous.
That is. I think that is just arrogance. I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah.
I think the world will integrate. We'll all find our way. It's just, if you want to be part of it, be part of it. If you don't want to be part of it, don't be part of it, you know.
Yeah. So
I was wanting to leave you with this Buddhist analogy, actually, that I practice Nichiren Buddhism, which actually went from India to China to Japan, and now has sort of spread across the world. And there's an analogy in that about a glass, which is half full of water. And if you take a spoon and you swirl the water in the glass, if there's no sediment in the glass, you'll see clear water. But if there's sediment, it's going to obviously stir up the sediment, and the water is going to become unclear. You know, there's going to be stuff there. So that's sort of compared to what it's like to live life with your ego. When you live life directed with your ego, there's always sediment, and people will stir. Life will stir. That is the function of life, and somehow the function of people. But if you keep your sediment out of your glass will always be clear, no matter how much people stir, you know, or how much life stirs you.
Yeah, life is chaotic and unpredictable.
It is.
And one of the things that I use in my lessons and my teaching, especially with Chinese people, because Chinese people are generally less optimistic. They need more certainty in their decision-making processes. So one of the things that I just basically always tell people is they have to learn to embrace uncertainty.
Yeah, that's actually one of the central tenets of spirituality, to understand and accept that there's nothing certain, to be happy with uncertainty, to understand that that is status quo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because you've got a house and a car and a wife and a whatever, anything can go wrong at any point, which is why you need to embrace your soul, because if you don't, you're coming back in another life situation. So just get out now.
Yeah, it's especially helpful for this course because, you know, I've had guests schedule at the last minute, drop by at the last minute, reschedule. Like I said, I have Zoom calls and live interview calls when people make last minute changes, all going on in the same day. And I just have to pack everything up, go downstairs and reset up my studio. So it's part of the fun. I mean, it doesn't bother me anymore.
Yeah,
it doesn't bother me at all.
I'm really impressed with how organized you are with your contacts. I haven't done that, and I have to go and do that now. It's just so annoying.
Well, you know, you have to launch on Sunday.
I know, I don't have much time. I know, I'm going to do it. I have you today. I have 2 interviews tomorrow. But I will do it. I will start on it today. I'm also launching my website at the same time, which is a spiritual resource. So there's a lot of...
Are you in the Business Accelerator course?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I haven't said...
I guess you're in London, so you'll be at the graduation.
I will, yes. Okay. Are you coming for it?
I am, so I look forward to meeting you in person then.
Oh, great. Yes, we'll meet in person then. Yeah. I look forward to that.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Was that okay for you? Any feedback?
No, I think you did great. I enjoyed being on your show. I really like your subject matter. I think it's important. You obviously take a completely different approach than me. I just take it purely from a business point of view.
Yeah.
But you're looking at it from a holistic life point of view, which is perfect. I mean, there's a lot of overlap in our audiences, and everybody can benefit from both of our messages. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I love the fact that I had someone who could approach it from a more from a less emotional point of view, because I think women tend to come at things it's not a generalization or a disrespectful remark. I'm a woman myself. We like to come at things with our emotions. You know, it's what makes us tender. It's what makes us care for people.
Right.
But your perspective sort of caters to those women who aren't like that. Because there are women who are not like that. There are women who are very much in their mental space and business space and want to approach life through, you know, AMAs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I don't think the two are exclusive. I think, you know, you can be very caring and then also be in control of your emotions. The key is to eliminate your negative emotions and
yeah.
amplify your positive emotions. That's the key.
Mm.
For women, again, I'm not a woman, so I don't know, but you know, there's always certain times of the month where negative emotions get amplified, and
Yeah.
you just have to be aware of that and manage that.
Yes, it's true. It's true. It doesn't happen only then. It happens in a lot of circumstances when things get triggered, you know,
Yeah.
childhood memories or whatever. I think everyone's emotional. I think women just express it more because culturally women are allowed to express it more.
Some of it is biological, some of it's actually hormonal. It
Yes.
has to do with for males, it's the testosterone level, and then for females, it's the estrogen level. So a lot of that in biology, that's not my field of expertise, but it's just a different way of understanding why different people behave differently and not judging them for it.
Yeah, fair enough. I
Yeah.
think I have one episode called the Judgment Index. We have a scientist on who's invented the Judgment Index, which is a way to test how you judge yourself.
Yeah, these things that we talked about today, it's really helped me in my marriage because my wife is Chinese and very emotional. And I've learned to embrace every negative thing she ever says in a positive light. So I never get upset. It's just a way of living. And then once you discover this path of looking at everything in a positive way, then life is just happier.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a win-win. And my wife is now so gravitated to everything that I talk about because she looks back in hindsight and realizes she's amazed that I was able to not react negatively to something so negative.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's a great partnership.
Yeah.
That's really a great partnership.
So I just heard that my headphones are out of batteries. So
All right,
I think
Gene.
it's a good time to end our call.
All right, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Look forward to seeing this up on iTunes.
Yes, it'll be up on Monday.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.